Welcome back to Season 2 of Black Sheep by BBH. I'm your host, writer and performer, Daniella Isaacs. The world's a very different place from where we were at the end of Series 1, but the philosophy of the podcast remains exactly the same. Over the season, I'll be sitting down with an eclectic flock of black sheep. The only thing our guests have in common is difference. They've all broken rules to make change. In light of George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis and the concurrent horrendous events in the US, we've decided to launch our second season with a conversation I was lucky enough to have with Rokhaya Diallo. Rokhaya is an award-winning French filmmaker, journalist and activist. She generously explains her experience of systemic racism in France and tells us what it's like to stand up to the government. Back in 2017, the French government found themselves in a public-facing controversy. They'd assembled a 30-member commission to advise Prime Minister Emmanuel Macron on a new inclusive digital policy. Soon an open letter surfaced, written by an MP from a major right-wing political party, addressed to the French Prime Minister. The letter strongly disapproved of the appointment of two members of the commission, rapper Action and journalist Rokhaya Diallo. Rokhaya was described in the letter as a decolonial feminist who was guilty of publicly speaking about state racism. Diallo was deemed in the letter to be too contemptuous of France to serve the Republic. And as a consequence, Rokhaya was dismissed from membership. Being thrown into the public eye didn't slow Rokhaya down. She's the author of multiple books, a podcast host, and Rokhaya is about to release a new documentary called Où sont les Noirs? Acting While Black, Blackness on French Screens. Rokhaya has many more accolades to her name, but if I continued to list them, we'd leave very little time for the interview itself. It's disheartening, really, to think that being an anti-racist activist makes Rokhaya a disruptor. Her message, though, is one of hope. This conversation was recorded before lockdown and before recent events in the US. I asked Rokhaya, how would you like things to change further? In light of the current climate, that seems like such a ridiculous question now. We hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, Rokhaya, and Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you for introducing me so nicely.
The name of the podcast is Black Sheep. I normally start off every episode by asking our guests, do you think of yourself as a black sheep?
I have never thought of myself in that way, but I can understand the meaning of the expression, like being singled out because I stand for certain ideas that are not always popular. So in that way, I recognize myself in that description.
Mm-hmm. And do you think as a black spokesperson in France that immediately places you as a black sheep within your community?
Not necessarily. I think that it does, because I'm black and at the same time I tackle racism and sexism. It's like being black and being disruptive at the same time singles you out. But as long as if you're a minority, as long as you seem polite and grateful, you're okay.
Mm-hmm. Whereas you probably don't want to appear polite or grateful, understandably. So with that in mind, Rokhaya, will you throw us in, please, to the first rule that you have broken?
Yes, the first rule is there is no such thing as a race. Meaning that I've been raised thinking that race didn't exist because we all belong to the same race, the human race. And the more I was understanding race and racism, the more I understood that it was not about the biological race, because for sure we're all the same, we bleed with the same blood. But the thing is that socially race exists. I am born and raised French, but I'm a black woman also, which means that if I have a friend who is also French like me, but white, we are not treated in the same way in the society. That means that race is not a biological divide, but it's a social construct. It has been constructed by history and by politics, and it means that it exists because of racism, because people are not treated in the same way. They are discriminated against in housing, in work, to be hired, for example. And those way of treating people differently create race. And that's the thing that was difficult to me to understand, because it's a major taboo in France, especially because we have a very sad history with slavery, colonialism, genocide, the Holocaust. It doesn't make people comfortable in France hearing the word race, because it directly echoes with the colonies or the Nazis and things like that. And to me, using race is a tool to fight racism.
Just so we can really explore the kind of political and social landscape of France, some people might be unaware of how the term race or the word race has been removed from the constitution. So can you just explain that to us?
Yes, there was a debate about the constitution, because the first article of the French constitution used to say that people shouldn't be treated differently according to their race and other criterias. And the debate was, but race doesn't exist. We all belong to the human race, so the word race shouldn't be in the constitution. And at some point, the Congress, the French Congress, so the Assemblée nationale and the Senate, voted unanimously to remove the word race from the constitution.
And that was in 2017.
Yes. And that was, I know that it was well intended, but the result was you have no ground now to just tackle racism, because if you remove race, how can you just speak about racism, and how can you fight racism? So that's something to me that was kind of naive, because it's not a magical tool. If you don't speak about racism will not disappear in the same way. And it's something that is to me kind of candid, because they were meaning to do well and to kind of protect minorities from being singled out, but removing the word from the constitution doesn't change the way people are treated in the society.
And can you expand on that a bit? So I guess, first of all, if we're talking about society, what about the kind of systemic racism within institutions, the police, etc.?
For example, I have a figure. For example, in France, you have a identity check by the police. So a police officer can come to you randomly and check your ID. And we have figures that say that if you are seen as an Arab man or a black man, young man especially, you are 20 times more likely to be checked than if you belong to any other categories. Yeah. Which means that police, which is an institution, don't really treat everyone in the same way. So that's what I call systemic or state-sponsored racism, because it's an institution that is supposed to protect all the citizens, but it just reproduces prejudices that people have toward minorities and toward especially men of color. And those prejudices, they come from the history. History has constructed categories in which you have, in the lower scale, you have people of color, black people, Arab people, Asian people. And because of that history, because those people are descent from people who were enslaved or colonized, they are still seen as not being truly French and as being a kind of, danger to the rest of the society. That's the reason why they are over-policed. If you are 20 times more likely to be checked by the police, it means that you are 20 times more likely to be exposed to police brutality, and even more. Because I guess that if a white person is checked and if a person of color is checked, the treatment is not really the same. So that means that you are exposed to violence in a way that other people don't experience.
So when the letter was revealed back in 2017, trying to get you off the committee, and the politician said that you were kind of raising awareness wrongly of state racism, was this the type of thing that you think he was referring to?
Exactly. The thing is that we have a conception of the French Republic as something almost sacred, like it's what characterizes France. And when you speak about the French Republic, it's the thing that has given us the tools for freedom, for equality, for all the values that that France carries. So if you question the fact that the Republic can be imperfect, you're seen as challenging something very deep. And what she was angry about was the fact that I was challenging the consensus, saying that the French Republic is perfect. And it's not perfect because even if it was created after a revolution against the French kings, it was also the French Republic was it was given birth in the colonial times during the slavery, so it could raise very noble values as liberté, égalité, fraternité, but at the same time enslaving and colonizing people. That means that the French Republic has to be questioned. It had to be questioned in the past, and it still has to be questioned. And as an MP, I think that she positioned herself as the guardian of the French values. And I think that being a daughter of immigrants, I'm not necessarily seen as a typical French person. So I don't think I'm authorized to question the Republic in the same way as other person that would be seen as like purely French, even if I don't think that there is a purity in Frenchness.
Mm-hmm. And so now, or even back then, how did you try and do it? You did it so well, but to stand up to the system.
I just try to explain my point. So as you said in your introduction, I write books, I make documentaries. So I try to be the most. I try to give tools for people to understand. So legal tools, figures, trying to reach example in history, and not to be in like controversies that because she wrote a letter, but the letter was not grounded on any very serious basis. It was just she accuses me of being decolonial or decolonial feminism. I don't even know how it's bad to be decolonial, because if you're not decolonial, you're colonial. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how can it be bad to promote the ending of the colonial lens. So I try to do my best in standing with my beliefs and in trying to explain them.
And how did it feel to see that letter?
The letter was the beginning, actually, because after the letter there was a member of the government who stated who published a press release to say that he asked to the head of the council to give him a new list of people that would allow the debates to be more quiet and serene. And that was and at some point she was the head. So Marie Eklund, we need to name her because she was very brave. She was called at the Palace of the Élysée, which is a place where the government has its offices, to be told to remove me from the council. So and at that point it became like a national debate. So I could see debate on TV whether about whether I should be removed or not. And to me it was crazy. I was like, I did agree to be part of a council, to work voluntarily and for free for my country, and it was and my country didn't want me to work for it. So to me that was disproportionate. It was shocking. It was kind of shocking because whenever I was turning the TV or the radio on, I was hearing my name and people debating about, oh no, she's so radical, she shouldn't stay there, and if you critique the Republic you cannot work for the Republic at the same time, which doesn't make any sense for me, because if you to me, if you critique something, it means that you have high expectations about it, and it was criticizing France to me is believing in it, believing that it can be better.
How then, after that letter, are you left with any faith in your government?
I think I was kind of disappointed because they could have been braver, like just saying that all the opinions should be represented, and even if they don't agree with what I stand for, it's it's up to the democracy to just create spaces in which everybody can say whatever they want to say as long as it's legal. And I think that I had something to bring to that reflection about the digital sphere, about hate speech, online hate speech, especially because I was exposed to that, and to me they just decided to listen to a few people who were not ready to see the country changes and to hear other voices than their own voices.
And as a consequence, as we said earlier, the entire committee resigned.
Yes.
As a consequence of that, do you think the government took note and has changed their views in any way?
I don't think so, but I think that they were but I was surprised because I think that there was this idea, as Marie Ecland, the head of the council, was a woman. They had this idea that she would just obey and not challenge what she was told to do, and I think that they realized that they did a bad move because it was a national controversy that became international afterwards, and I think that it was the first time that the New York Times published an op-ed that was against Emmanuel Macron because he was just elected the same year, and he has a very good image internationally. And I think that the title was like France fails facing race or something like that. So it was very not a good image to him. But at some point, I don't see major changes in the government.
And have you had any interactions with the government since?
No, I haven't. Which is weird, but I haven't, no.
So I'm just thinking about our listeners, and obviously, you're talking about the government and being a kind of a member of society. Does it make you think that people should question the systems that they're in? Whether that's their job or anything like that. And I'm thinking about the microaggressions that you mentioned earlier. How can we kind of be aware of that within the systems that we work within?
I think that the first thing is to be aware of who you are in the society. So if you have privileges, you need to know them and to acknowledge them, because it's always difficult, for example, as a man, to understand that you are privileged because you live in a society that was built for you with advantages for you, and that if you live in such a comfortable position, it means that some other are living in oppression. And it's the same for people, for white people, about whiteness, that gives you privileges that are the same privileges that discriminate people of color. So being aware of that is, to me, a first step, and always questioning yourself, questioning what you benefit, how you benefit from other people being oppressed, is something to me that is important. And yes, you were speaking about the government, but the system is everywhere, and microaggression can be like things that can seem very superficial, like don't touch black people's hair, for example. It's something that happens all the time. And if you are curious about someone being different from you, just ask before, but don't act as if their body was a kind of circus or something like that. It's their body, their intimacy, and they need to be, questioned before you do anything. And you touching hair, even for kids, it's not something that make people comfortable. And it's an example among others, but those microaggressions really are really difficult for people, minorities, to live. And other microaggressions are what you hear, on a daily basis in the media, for example, when you hear like racist statements. It really, it makes you feel like you don't belong, because you have people constantly questioning the fact that you are part of the country, that your culture, fits, that the way you dress, the way you speak, the way you look isn't really, British or French, and it's part of the microaggression that you get. And if you add the media to what you experience on a daily basis, to the fact that you can be checked by the police, that you won't get a job, that you won't get the apartment that you could have, it really creates an atmosphere that makes you feel and actually that excludes you. And it's very difficult to understand if you're not exposed to that. The second rule is don't name and shame. I created an anti-racist organization in 2007, which name is Les Indivisibles, the Indivisibles. Was actually, because it doesn't exist anymore, but still, it was, so the purpose was to use humor to tackle racism, and we decided to create an award ceremony, which is like a kind of parody of the Academy Awards. And the ceremony was meant to award the worst racist sentences authored by public personalities. So the goal was to name and shame people who, on a daily basis, were authoring racist statements on TV, on radio, in the newspapers, without facing any consequences. And to us, it was important just to put all the sentences all together, because when you hear only one sentence, you can think that it's an accident. It's just that person is, racist or whatever. But if you put all the sentences all together, you understand that there is something systemic, because all the sentences, the statements echoes to each other, and you understand that they're carrying the same ideology. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you challenge the people who have authored them, and you make them just having to give a response, to say, okay, we're watching you, and you can say whatever you want to say, but we need to, you need to know that we don't agree, and we can make fun of what you have said.
So what are examples of people that you named and shamed? Let's name and shame them.
Many people, like Nicolas Sarkozy, who used to be the president, people who are famous in France, so like Eric Zemmour, he's a French journalist, and he's had like, how do you say that? In French, we say pour l'ensemble de son œuvre. I think it's life achieving, awards.
Life Achievement Award.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. He had one because he's so good in racism. And and there is one journalist who came to claim his prize. Yes, the only one. His name is Christophe Barbier. He's the head of one of the major news magazines. And he came, and that was interesting because in the audience, people were like disturbed because the things he said were really offensive, and at the same time, he was there. So. And
why was he there? To apologize or not?
No, he didn't apologize. That's why at the end people were angry, because he came. I think he came, and to us it was a way to say that I need to address that. So it was a victory to us, because during the first editions, people were like, okay, it was well covered by the media, but people who were rewarded ignored us. But the one who came, Christophe Barbier, it was interesting because he's someone very famous in France, and having him coming meant that at some point we did have a place in the political landscape.
And what was his reaction?
He was trying to explain.
Right.
But that didn't make any sense. And it was like, I don't know. I remember his explanations were not convincing at all.
So I guess that's an important question. Once people are made aware of their behaviour, and I'm not saying that it's for you to necessarily have the solution, but how are they meant to respond? What's the best response? If someone is made aware of a microaggression or even an aggression, what do we think the best response might be?
To listen to the people who are oppressed. Like, for example, for myself, I'm trying to also promote values of equality for all the oppressed group, and I'm not part, for example, of the LGBTQ community. So whenever I'm challenged in something I say, something I produce, I listen and I try to learn from what I hear from people who are, for example, transgender or, homosexuals, gays, lesbians, because I cannot feel how it is to be oppressed because you're LGBTQ. So that means that I have much to learn, and you need to be humble and to say you don't know everything. Even if you're well-intended, it doesn't mean that what you say is okay. And I think the first step is to be able to question yourself and to understand that if you live in a society that is oppressive to people of color, to LGBTQIA, to women, you are part of the society, so you are impregnated by the prejudices, and you can just reproduce them without even knowing that. And once you know that, you can just question the way you see society, the way you frame certain things you say, and maybe not saying, oh, no, I'm not transphobic. I'm okay. I have a friend who is transgender, and not resisting, just listening and trying to understand what was offensive in what you said.
Absolutely. I reckon that at the moment, particularly with Twitter and social media in general feeling so high octane and angry, it's very difficult to begin a conversation. It's great to name and shame, but as a consequence, does it just create more of a disparity between two groups? Or is there a version where that naming and shaming can encourage conversation?
It can encourage conversation, and it also can give strength to people who are oppressed, because generally it's people who don't have power, who don't have platforms, who are suddenly able to enter the public sphere, because us as being les indivisibles, we were not people in the public sphere. We were the ones who used to be just attacked by what we hear on TV, and Christophe Barbier is the one who has access to all the TV sets. So it's just a way to say that we can just build our own power and we can challenge you. And to me, it gives strength, and it also gives pride to people who need to be taken into consideration. The ceremonies were packed, people were laughing, and it was a good way just to breathe at last and just to take back the power, because we don't have it usually. And it was just kind of a safe space where we could just speak our minds without having people, microaggressing, minorities, and just making fun of what is usually experienced as very offensive.
Mm-hmm. And do you think there's ever negatives to naming and shaming?
It depends, because I think that maybe there is something about the call-out culture, because you need to allow people to make mistakes. Like if you name and shame someone and the person stops what she's been named and shamed for, it's okay, as long as the person stops, understand, and decide to take a different way, it's okay. But you cannot make people responsible for what the person have said if it's in the past, and if the person has acknowledged the fact that it was wrong and that the person has decided to do something different. So I think that you need to have a room for people to apologize and to understand that things that they have done were mistakes. And because I'm sure I've made many mistakes, and I think there are things that I don't see in the same way as I used to see them 10 years ago. And so, you make your own way, you learn, and it's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from your mistakes.
How do you retain any sense of hope, even after a ceremony like that, where I'm sure there's a huge sense of community within the award ceremony, but how do you go back outside with hope?
We have hope because we had hope, and we still have hope because we've been able to just how can I say that, organize a ceremony and respond to something that we were not able to respond before. It's something that is new, because usually we were isolated, every person in at his own place, at his or at their own place, just facing racism without any power to respond. So it was just joining forces to do something, and to me it's a good reason for having hope.
And was it an inclusive environment, meaning were there allies of other cultures there or not?
Yes, it was a very multicultural organization, and even the hosts, the people who came to give the names of the nominees, of the winners, they were very mixed, and it was something that was a strength in the organization, because it was created actually by people from very different backgrounds, and it was something because The thing is that when you speak about racism, you tend to think that it's a minority problem. So you will speak about black people, about Muslims, about Asian people, but it's something that affects everyone, and it's not because you are in position of power or because you benefit of something that you are not part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily okay to live on privileges that makes people sad or living in bad conditions. So to me, everyone has a responsibility in racism, in sexism.
So to people listening who are maybe thinking of someone to name and shame, what would you say is the most productive way of doing that so that it encourages conversation rather than disparity?
It depends on the connection you have with that person. If it's someone that you like, that you love, you'd better have a conversation with that person than naming and shaming the person. When we did the Yabon Awards, there were people that we didn't know, so we didn't care about, hurting their feelings, actually, because they were public persons, and to us it was just having a platform to make people understand that they had a responsibility as public figures.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are in your personal sphere, it's very different, because you have feelings for certain persons, and you don't want them to disappear from your environment. So maybe having a conversation, questioning, sharing is a better way to make people evolve.
And what about if it's someone, if we're thinking about a structure, so someone above you, whether that's someone you work for or a school you're in and it's an academic above you, or...
So in those cases, I think that you need to find someone else, a third person that would be able to help you, because it's very difficult in that case. So if it's a structure, a company or something, there should be someone in the HR or something that could help, that could be helpful. But in those cases, it's very difficult to go by yourself. You need to have allies. It's better and it's easier, especially because if you are affected by the offensive statement or actions that have been uttered, you can be seen as being, too sensitive, even if it's not true. So if you have allies, it's easier to be heard.
Do you ever get, I'm just listening to you give such brilliant advice, do you ever get fed up with having to be the person that gives the advice?
I am, but I don't do that all the time. Like, it's my work, but, the rest of the time I have...
You seek advice from your friends.
Yes. I'm glad to be helpful, but at the same time, I try not to make my life political struggle. It's very important to take care of yourself and not to have every part of your life being dedicated to a cause, because at some point it really makes you, it can make you sad or even sick. So I really try to keep room for myself.
I think we're going to discuss that probably in more detail in your final broken rule.
The final rule is don't rise to the bait. So it means that being public and being a woman and being a black woman makes me very visible in what I say, especially because I tackle racism and sexism. So it means that I have very violent responses. I have been targeted by threats, by death threats, by rape threats, and it's something that is constant on social media. And it's meant to discourage me and all the people who try to make points on those issues and to make them just give up. And I decided not to give up, and I have had several different strategies. So I block people who bother me on social media. And the other thing is that I have sued some people, and there have been trials that I won. And, once you're in front of the judge and the judge reads what you've said on social media and you have to explain what you've said, it's very different. Mm-hmm. And you have to face a judge and, the victim of the threat. And at some point, those people were fined. So it means that the judges, according to the judges, they had not only attacked me, but they had damaged something that they owed to the society, the whole society. So it's important to me to remind to people that the laws also applies itself on social media. It's not a space where there is no rules. There are no rules, no laws. The laws also have an impact on those spaces.
And have you ever engaged in a conversation with someone that's been threatening in order to try and make them understand their ignorance or not?
I can get into a conversation with someone who disagrees with me, but as long as it's something that is insulting or threatening, I don't want to engage, because I think that you don't do that in the street. You don't, call out people in the street and shout, call people names, because you know it's not okay, and you know that you can face immediate consequences if you do that. If I go to the, to the subway or in a train and I just shout to a woman, I call her names, people won't, you will have to face a response.
Yeah, and consequences.
Yeah, so it means that if you don't do that in the streets and if you do that on social media, it means that that it's not okay. And at that point, I don't want to engage conversations with people who are disrespectful.
Am I right in thinking that because of this, you made a documentary about the hate?
Yes, I did. So the documentary is called The Networks of Hate, Les Réseaux de la Haine in French. So if you speak French, it's available online. And it was, because I was privileged enough to be able to have a lawyer and to go to the court, but it's not the case of everyone. So I wanted to understand the mechanic of hate on social media and to interview other people who were exposed to the same kind of hate, and to make people understand that it was not okay to do that and that the law was on their side. And so that's why I did that, and it was like 6 years ago already. So I start with the threat I got and until the trial. And in the documentary, I meet other people who were targeted with homophobia, sexism, or other kind of insults.
And what did you learn from that project?
That social media were not at the origin of hate, that it was just an echo to what is already in the society. So when politicians want to censor social media, to me it's a mistake, because it just reflects what is already there, and that social media don't create hate or racism or sexism or homophobia. It's just a reflection of what already exists. So the work is to be done not only in the way people express themselves there, but what they think, what they understand from our common humanity.
It's clear you have such resilience to be able to just block and move on from the people that are abusing you really online. How have you built that resilience?
I think I was fortunate enough to have a strong, environment with family, with my friends. I know that it doesn't really count. Those spaces don't really count, because at some point I go to my real life and it's okay. I have friends, I have my family, and my life is happy enough not to for me not to give too much importance to those moments. But it's difficult. The first insults that I got were like, I was shocked. I was like, wow. But and I understand that, when I'm in France or in Paris, some people recognize me in the street, and in 10 years I've never got any negative comments, which means that people who don't like me and recognize me, obviously they don't even try to say something to me. So that means that they use those spaces because they can't even, they're not even brave enough to stand for what they think.
Yeah, and I guess that's a useful thing to remember before you respond or before you have a reaction.
Yes.
It's knowing that ultimately they're just cowards. Why do you think there is such anger?
I think that the public sphere, the public space have been overtaken by a minority of privileged, mostly white male, and that it's shocking to see other people just speaking their minds and doing so without fear, like without apologizing themselves for existing. And I think that the anger comes from that, like comes from that, because I think that being one of the few black women on French TV, especially as a pundit, people would expect me to be grateful and to be happy to be there. And I'm happy, but I'm as happy as anyone else. So I don't think that I should, display more gratitude than anyone else. And that's the thing that make people angry. They would say, "Oh, she's so arrogant. Like she's who does she think she is?" Because it's still not that common. That's the thing. I think that's one of the reasons why people are angry. And in France, especially, race is very taboo.
And do you think there's a movement now with our generation, and I mean particularly in France, where it's beginning to change?
Yes, I can see a very obvious gap between the older generations and the younger ones. The younger ones understand that it's important to understand the mechanics of domination, and they're not. They're quite more comfortable speaking about race, about gender than the former generations, and they understand that if you speak about those issues, it doesn't mean that you are creating divisions in society, but just acknowledging the fact that all the people are not treated in the same way, and that if you want to have, if you want to promote the values of equality, you need to acknowledge the fact that we're not there. And before being there, we need to know that there are races, there are genders, and there are, sexual orientations and things like that.
So it feels so at odds. I know I'm returning now back to your first broken rule, that it was in 2017 that the word race got removed, and it feels like that was just at the turning point where our generation was speaking up and saying, no, race is important. Mm-hmm. So how bizarre, what a massive generation gap going on at the exact same time.
Yes. It's funny because the younger generation is not saying that race is important because we give to us it's important in our identity, but it's important to be acknowledged because it has consequences. And sometimes people don't understand, older people don't understand, because they say, oh, you're just carrying your race like as an identity. And I wish I could just walk in the street without being seen as a black woman, but I happen to be a black woman in a country that has a history with black people, and I am the product, what I am is a product of what was constructed by our ancestors. So it's but it's moving.
And how would you like it to change further?
Well, I hope that we will have the freedom to be whoever we want to be without being oppressed for that, like having the gender that we feel we have, being whatever we want to be culturally, wearing a religious sign if we feel like. And I hope that we will go to a point where it won't matter anymore.
Rokhaya, will you tell me please the one rule that you will never break?
So the one rule that I would never break would be to be unfair to other people. Like it would be very against my values to be unfair and not to respect the ideal of justice.
Do you ever find that difficult?
Yes, because sometimes you need to just. For example, there was a debate about. There is a debate. It's interesting. In France, there is in the far right party, there is one of the not the head, but the representative of the far right party happens to be a man who was born in Egypt. So he's an Arab man, and he's French now, but and he stands for all the racist ideas of the far right, being himself an Arab man. And there is a comedian who teases him with kind of with a wording that is usually used against Arabs. So to me, it's not really fair, because I can understand why it's funny, but to me, we can challenge the guy on his ideas, not on his origins. So it's very tempting to say, oh yes, you're just this and this, and that's, and it's funny because he's very upset by that. But at the same time, I don't want to go to that, because I think I don't want him to be treated in a way I wouldn't want to be treated, because there is plenty of things to say about what he thinks and what he stands for.
This might be quite a broad question, but do you sometimes find it difficult to work out what treatment is unfair?
Yes, it is. It is, but you have it's at the same time difficult, but at the same time not that much difficult, because you have rules, you have values, and you just need to ask yourself if you would maybe think differently if the person was on your side.
What do you mean by that?
I wouldn't agree on any Arab person being called names if the person was progressive. So why is it okay if the person is from the far right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that.
And how do you make people aware of their wrongdoings, which is often what you talk about in your writing and in the different pieces of art that you make, without feeling anger?
Interesting. I don't feel anger because I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know why. I don't know if it's something that is my personality or not. But for example, when I speak on TV, I don't try to change the people who are around the table. I don't care about what they think. I'm just using the platform to speak to people who maybe are wondering or agree with me. But I'm not investing energy to change people that that carry other ideas than mine. It's too much work, and I'm not there to educate people. I'm okay to share tools, but I'm not I don't want to educate people.
I guess the reason I ask that in connection to the rule that you'll never break is that, if a central value of yours is to treat people fairly,
mm-hmm.
It's so clear from the stats that you've given me that many black people in France and all over the world are treated unfairly.
Mm-hmm.
So for you to retain fairness is an incredibly admirable trait, and one that I imagine must be very difficult to stick to at times.
It is, but I think it's okay to feel anger. I'm not against anger, because I don't like the fact that that someone would say to someone who is oppressed, you shouldn't be angry, and you should express yourself in this or that way, because it's an additional oppression. To me, it's okay to be angry. It's okay, and it's totally justified. You're a woman post Me Too, you're a black person facing police brutality. You have all the reasons to be angry.
Perhaps that expression is another way of creating art.
Exactly.
Which is exactly what you've done. And I thank you for it. What an inspiring, really game-changing black sheep. So thank you so much for sparing an hour of your time with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks so
you for
much.
having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you for the conversation.